when you re-look at the Gospels and you see Jesus talking about hell and you replace it with Gehenna, which is the only word that he used, right? Like, how does that change the Gospels for you? Like, when you found that out, can you talk a little bit about that?
In my chapter, Hell on Earth, in the book, I spend the most time talking about Gehenna. I kind of talk about what the Bible says about hell. And the Old Testament really doesn't have anything to say about hell. Sheol is the word used in the Old Testament that's often translated hell, but that just means death, the grave. It's not a place of torture or judgment. It actually, even the good people go there, right? So there was no concept of a punishing afterlife. In the New Testament, most of the doctrine of hell comes from a couple verses in Revelation that are apocalyptic hyperbole, but then you take those images of fire, which are, again, like these apocalyptic fire images, which are not meant to be taken literally. And if you put that onto some of the sayings of Jesus, then you can kind of make this amalgamation and come up with the doctrine of hell, which, then you supply some imagery from medieval times to kind of accentuate the flames, that sort of thing from Dante. But what Jesus talked about was Gehenna. And so a lot of times preachers will say, well, Jesus talked about hell more than anybody. But as you mentioned, actually, if Gehenna wasn't hell, then he didn't talk about hell at all. He talked about Gehenna more than anybody. But what did he mean by Gehenna? Jesus didn't come up with that metaphor. First of all, Gehenna is the valley of Hinnom. That's what that means. It's a real ass valley outside of Jerusalem. And the first person to use the metaphor of the valley of Hinnom as a place of judgment was Jeremiah. Jeremiah said that the valley of Hinnom would become a valley of slaughter because the Babylonians were going to destroy Jerusalem and the temple, and they would slaughter so many people that the bodies would be stacked in the valley of Hinnom. Jeremiah was very metal. This is apocalyptic. It's horrible, but he's not talking about what happens in the afterlife. He was talking about what was about to happen in their lives, with judgment coming, not in the form of an afterlife torture chamber, but in the form of Babylon's armies. Now, fast forward 400 years, and Jesus also spoke to people on the brink of societal collapse. A lot of people don't think about this. 40 years after the life of Jesus, Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed for the second time in history. The first time was by the Babylonians, right after Jeremiah prophesied. The second time was after Jesus by the Romans in AD 70. Matthew's gospel was written primarily to Jewish people who had survived that apocalyptic destruction of Jerusalem. The diasporic Jews was who Matthew wrote his gospel to, and he wrote it within 10 years of the destruction of Jerusalem. Most scholars think somewhere around the end of the 70s, Matthew wrote that gospel. In other words, this gospel was written to people who had literally just watched their temple and their city burned to the ground. Now, in the lips of Jesus, you have these warnings. Unless you change your ways, Gehenna will be upon you. And Jesus actually explicitly connects that to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem multiple times, basically saying that upon this generation, that destruction is going to come.